If you're joining us for the first time or you've not been with us very long and don't know what I mean by a spring program, twice a year we come together as part of our small group ministry, and as a community we study one book, one work together. I speak about it, Sue speaks about it on Sunday morning, and then we break into groups if you choose to join us. I forgot to ask you, Rachel, are there any spaces left in groups?
There are spaces left in groups. So in the e-bulletin that went out this morning are the links to the groups that have a few spaces left. So we would love to see them all completely full with 10 participants per group.
And if there's someone joining us today who didn't receive the e-bulletin,
then they would email me at rachel@columbineunity.org, and I will take care of it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great job. So what happens is, and what's special about these programs that we do is that then you have an opportunity to work the material yourself, to explore it and to deepen. And what we often find is there's a sense of a deeper living of life in our community, that we impact the congregation, we impact the consciousness of the congregation. So we invite you to join along with us. I've already heard from some of you that you're not able to participate in groups, but you've come together in informal groups. All that is just fine. We're just happy that you're joining us. So this year we made a quick switcheroony. In fact, it was Sue who made the switcheroony. We were going to study radical forgiveness. It just didn't seem quite the topic of the hour, if you will. And Sue found radical compassion. Now, why would compassion be an important subject at this time? And part of it is, having compassion for ourselves, right? But something that we often don't consider is when we're triggered, it's not a compassionate experience. We're in a regular pressure cooker for many of us right now. And in that pressure cooker, when it puts pressure on our ego structure, it's anything but angelic inside. We're being poked and prodded. We're being judged and pushed. We have all sorts of emotions that can be coming up. It's not settling, and it has the impact of disconnecting us then from our nature, which is not only loving and compassionate, but also is imbued with literally dozens of qualities that support us in times like this, that bring the actual quality that is needed to the moment so that we can stay grounded, that we can feel purposeful, that we can stay relaxed and present. And so you can see compassion becomes a great subject of the hour. And Tara Brock, the author of the book, she says that so often when we get triggered, sometimes it's, very dramatic and we know we're triggered. We are angry, something's come up, I'm triggered. But beautifully, she points out that a lot of times we don't know that we're triggered. And in fact, that we can be triggered for a period of time, for hours, for days, because we become so used to it. She says it puts us into a trance. And here's what she says about trance. A particularly unconscious state that, like a dream, is disconnected from the whole of reality. When we're in a trance, our minds are narrowed, fixated, and usually immersed in thought. Our hearts are often defended, anxious, or numb. You are in a trance when you're living on autopilot, when you feel walled off and separate from those around you, when you're caught up in feeling fearful, angry, victimized, or deficient. And what's interesting is that we often don't recognize that this is our experience. We're very used to it. But the beauty is that we don't need to be caught there. And Tara really takes us through a process that is my spiritual practice. She calls it RAIN, But it is the process that I would have called inquiry. It's the process of being curious and what's happening for us, and invites us into a process with it that allows us to break out, to come to a place where we are no longer caught. She calls it a U-turn, if you will, that if we're in a trance, the U-turn can break us out of the trance. Here's what she says about a U-turn in attention. We're taking a U-turn whenever we shift our attention from an outward fixation, another person, our thoughts, or our emotionally driven stories about what's going on, to the real living experience in our body. If you've been around Columbine for a while, you know that I am totally in love with the process of going to our body. Because you see, in our mind, where our ego lives, and our ego is just an accumulation of deep-seated beliefs and patterns that are intended to keep us safe, but often are not in any kind of touch with reality, we get lost. But the body never lies about what's going on. The body always is ready to inform us about what is happening in reality for us. And this process of RAIN is a body-centered process where she has taken the steps that I just generally throw together as inquiry and broken it down into 4 steps that are very helpful. Those steps are to recognize, to allow, to investigate, and to nurture. For recognize, she says, recognize what's going on inside. Anxious thoughts, tensions in your body, a sense of being armored, knotted, a sense of guilt or shame. Whatever it is that's going on, just recognize it. And then don't fall into the trap of thinking that it needs to be changed. That would be the normal activity of our mind or of the ego. It thinks that our situation can't possibly be right, and we need to be taken somewhere else, needs to be in control. So the next step, allow what's happening by breathing and letting it be. Even though we may not like what we're experiencing, our intention needs to be not to fix or to change anything. And just as important, not to allow ourselves to be judged for it. And then we move into what I would call inquiry. She calls it investigate. What's happening? And at this stage, I like to check in with my body to really center myself right in the feeling that I'm having, and to ask myself, how old does it feel, this feeling that's happening? How old is the one that's having this feeling? Who is having this feeling? What are they like? What are their concerns in life? And as I connect and sit with it, often then memories start coming up, and this picture starts filling in about what's really happening for me in this experience. From that, I most often, begin to have compassion. Oh, here's where I am. This is what's happening. And from that place of compassion, then it's easy to move into nurture, where we assure that part, where we support that part that is activated and upset. And we begin to come back. We land in our true self, in this place of quiet, still knowing, where there is an overwhelming sense that whatever's going on in our life, that everything is okay. It can be amazing how this comes up in us. I have been receiving not a huge number, somewhere under 30 emails, phone calls. I haven't received any texts, but emails and phone calls about how I or Sue have missed the mark, how we are not meeting your needs. And it's interesting, we often don't recognize our trances, right? But one of my trances is to accommodate. And when someone is upset with me, it very easily throws me into this unconscious place of accommodating. So I wasn't noticing it, but I've been going into accommodating. Going back and listening to the specific talks that were recognizing, hearing them from the place of the person who is expressing frustration with them, and feeling my judge can be on me. I'm feeling deficient. How did I ever become a minister anyway? My goodness, I'm just missing the mark. Will I ever miss the mark? And with all that in mind, and not really even giving it much thought, I landed on Friday, ready to work on my talk for today. And I'd ask almost all of these people, what exactly would you like me to talk about? So I actually had a list of about 30 items that I was trying to incorporate into today's talk. And how do I connect? I haven't been feeling a lot of fear. I've been feeling actually a lot of freedom around this whole coronavirus. And suddenly I'm trying to relate to, okay, what's it like to be feeling the fear? And, I'm into some kind of all knotted up place. When all of a sudden, something broke loose in me. And I felt huge. And I was, to say I was angry would be a bit of an understatement. I was ragefully angry. Good time to inquire, right? Good time to go, wow, something's happening for me. And it was interesting, while I was angry, what I could feel was there was a huge amount of just essential strength and power, which I know when I say that, that could be confusing to many of you. But after practicing this for 23 years now, I've used this as my own spiritual practice, this RAIN process. I've come to know when an essential quality is there versus when I'm triggered. And I could feel the strength and the power, and they felt huge, bigger than I have ever felt before. And for some reason, they were bringing up a huge amount. I guess I'm using the word huge a lot today, but a large amount of anger in me as I allowed myself to just settle into the anger. I was taken back actually to my experience with HIV and AIDS. Taken back to a time when my friends were getting sick and we couldn't take them to emergency rooms. We were being rejected, where we had to search out a very small number of doctors, where they were being kicked out of their apartments because landlords were afraid. And I remembered going to my church, a Unity church in Minneapolis, and it occurred to me that never once did anyone ever sit down and talk to the congregation about how to deal with AIDS. And yet, over 100,000 people were dying of AIDS every month. Do you know that 32 million people have died of AIDS? I've been a minister for 26 years. I've been in the Unity movement 50 years. I have never once heard a talk given on AIDS or HIV. And I sat there and I wondered, with all these people reaching out to me about how I have missed the mark with coronavirus, how did I ever get through? And it was so clear that I got through by applying the teachings. I hung on the words of the minister. I am a minority. I never would have expected that minister to have spoken to something that a minority would be dealing with. It never happens. And yet, with that was sort of a reality check. In retrospect, I realize that my strength and power coming forth to say, hey, you don't need to accommodate here. And yet, this energy was not resolving. Something that's interesting about our true nature is it rises as needed, and then it resolves. And we come back to the peace. I was still walking around the house, stomping, feeling angry, feeling rageful. And the divine order was amazing because Jean Berwick, one of our congregants, and I are teaching an inquiry tomorrow, Monday evening. And we were having a phone call to get together to work on what we were going to teach. And I said to her, when we're done with this, could we just process something? Something's not coming to resolution. And if you know Jean, she goes, why don't we just start there? And as I explained what was going on for me, she said, Scott, something is holding you back, holding your nervous system back from allowing all the strength and the power that wants to come forward right now. All the strength and the power that wants to support you in breaking this pattern of accommodating when you're under pressure. And as I began to feel into it, the anger and the rage gave way to fear. And a whole new host of memories began to rise for me. For you see, as my friends started to die, some of them dying in my living room because they'd been kicked out of their living place, I heard someone say that this was happening to us because we had hidden. And I realized that I needed to come out. I worked for a very conservative CPA firm at that time. I came out by bringing a man, a very handsome man, to a formal, it was a very proper sort of work environment. I took him to the spring formal. I started taking men to all of the events of the organization. And I can't remember if I volunteered or if I was asked, but I became a speaker for the Minnesota AIDS Project. I stopped working so much on the front lines, and I started being a voice for the organization. I spoke everywhere in the state. I'm not sure how many hundreds of talks I gave. And most of those talks were received with at least a sense of grace, right? I could tell that people were uncomfortable. No one came up and said, wow, that was the greatest talk I ever heard. But they were kind. But in the same way, in those talks, with some frequency, people would stand up and tell me that I was an abomination, would tell me that they hoped that I would die. I was spit on leaving those meetings. And the most horrific thing that happened to me is I came out of a meeting in rural Minnesota and someone had used feces to write fag on my car, on all the windows of my car. And I was afraid. I was afraid. Even though I stood there, even though that my will was up to say, this is important work, I came at it from a place of fear. I felt shame and humiliation as I tried to find something to clean the word fag written multiple times off my car. And it became clear to me that this is the kind of thing that's happened in my life that says to me, I must accommodate, or I will be met with shame and pain. And finally, I began to feel the softening. And I had said the day before, I had thanked with Jean, this part of me that wants to accommodate. I had thanked it for getting me through because it needed to be there for me to get through my childhood. It did. And I thanked it for getting me through everything in my life to this point. But I reassured it that I didn't need it to do that any longer, that I could actually keep it safe, that he didn't need to worry. But this morning, as I began to feel more deeply the fear, I was also able to add to that I'm sorry in my exuberance and my desire to bring about change for the GLBTQ community if I have traumatized you. I wish that I had known you better. I would have always insisted on taking a second person with me. I would have not left you up there to be yelled at, to be spit on, to have to face our car being defaced. And even this morning, I felt more relaxation. But right now, I'm shaking. Because these patterns are deeply ingrained in us. And because for me, this is a survival pattern. And so when you work this process of rain, it's not a one-time working. It's a process, an ongoing process. Tara says, our daily trance can feel ordinary and familiar, wrapping us in a cocoon of habit. You see, that's what I was experiencing with accommodating. It's just what I do. It can carry us in pleasurable fantasy, immerse us in obsessive thinking, and tumble us in waves of painful emotion. But whatever the content of our trance, we are cut off from ourselves and cut off from our capacity to connect authentically with those around us. We're just not all there. It's so true. It is not the fullness of me that shows up in accommodation, and I am not doing myself or any of you any help by accommodating you. I'm supporting you and myself in being in the trance. We're in the middle of a pressure cooker. For many of us, COVID-19 has brought on pressures that we would never imagine. And in that, it's important to understand that it's going to be more intense. The issues around COVID-19 tend to be those of safety, of those of survival. These are, what would we say? The word is slipping me. I'm going to look at my note because I made these are survival drives in us. And as survival drives, they are tenacious and they are not easy to see. They feel like they're just who we are. And so we need to come at what we're experiencing as best we can with some lightness, with some compassion, with some understanding. Tara uses the word flags. She says there are flags that can help us recognize when we are triggered. She lists a bunch of them on page 10 and 11. But I would also invite you, and I love the word subtle because it's subtle. She's speaking to this subtleness when she says, it's going to feel like a warm cocoon. It's going to feel like the place where you just usually live. And so we want to be looking for the subtleness of it. For example, when our need to survive, when our need to be safe is up, we have little or no capacity for not knowing. We want to know. We expect our leaders to know. We find ourselves ingrained or immersed in media, and we want our ministers to tell us what's going on. And then when we find out they don't really know what's going on either, then we're angry. And we have no trouble, right, just whipping out an email or making a phone call. We are caught in a young child that is frustrated that you're not seeing that its needs, that we around it are not seeing that its needs are not getting met. And it wants to be attuned to, and it wants to be attuned to perfectly. And so you can feel yourself just feeling irritated. You may feel that you're angry, or you may feel that you're just afraid all the time. These are great flags to be looking at. And notice, if you can notice how the focus is always outward. It's somebody else that's making you angry. It's something else. If you find yourself snapping at your partner or snapping at the wonderful person that brought you groceries so you didn't have to risk going to the store, these are all flags. Or maybe your tendency is more to try and put a lid on it. So you're putting a lid on your fear, or you're putting a lid on your anger, or you're putting a lid on your sense of grief. I remember a few weeks ago I talked about my brother and him calling me. He was clearly panicked. I said, "Wow, it's clear you're panicked." I'm not panicked. He's putting a lid on it. And then what happens there is our life starts to feel kind of lackluster, a little depressed. We're having trouble getting motivated. We're literally putting our life force in that container. When that happens, when any of those flags happen for you, it's an opportunity to turn to your body, to realize that something is happening. You may not know what it is. And to see where it is. Maybe you feel constricted in your throat. Maybe there's guarding over your heart. Maybe you're getting judged at your solar plexus. Maybe you're feeling knots or bowling balls in your belly of tension. Allow. Recognize that it's not easy to be with it, but allow. And as you align and as you're curious about what is the age of this, how long have I known this kind of tension? Where is it familiar? Then don't be surprised if memories start coming up. Memories that are intended to inform you. You may, like I, need to call someone to say, "Hey, I've got something going on. Would you just be here with me in it? I need some presence." Or if a question comes to you, will you ask me a question? To help us to move deeper. But at some point, the realization, the understanding begins to become clear, and then we can step out and nurture the part that is anxious, afraid, grieving, frustrated, cut off, feeling like he or she needs to do it on their own, wanting to be seen, wanting to be told what the truth is. And we as the adult can step up and say, "Sweetie, I will take care of that for you. You are safe. I will protect you. All is well." And I often find myself apologizing. "I'm so sorry that I didn't know what you were going through. I didn't really even know you. But I love you. And we can walk this journey together." Most of the time as we start these programs, I'm always saying, good luck. Because these books that we pick, and Sue picks most of these books, they invite us to move really deep, to heal at depth. And so if you find yourself challenged in this program, make use of your group. Know that you can reach out to Sue and I. But most of all, know that as much as your ego wants to make everything around you wrong, to demonize, to be caught in fear, all of this is an invitation to heal and to move back into a place of love and compassion. And so let's take some time now for not a long meditation, just a few minutes of meditation as we settle into our nature as the Christ. Invite you to take a few deep breaths again. Remember to allow your breath, the exhale of your breath, to naturally begin to relax your body. Have compassion for yourself. If your mind is racing, if you're feeling upset, just know that something is percolating, something's going on. It might be time, as we move into this meditation, to begin to allow, to make space for the understanding. You may be being called into nurturing. We're not here to be rigid or structured. We're here simply to be, to relax together, to move our attention from our heads into the gentle movement of our breath or into the stillness of the Koth center in our belly, to break the trance. And as you continue to just allow yourself to be here, you may find how powerfully your head wants to pull your attention into thought. How powerfully the energies are there to distract you or to control you. Just gently breathe into them. This is what they know. This is how they have kept you safe. This is how they think you need to be safe. Just continue to breathe. Never judging, never rejecting. Just allowing. Recognizing that if we are triggered in this moment, we'll be seeing life from a deficient place, from a judgmental place. We're being prodded and picked at, and just, again, take the breath. Let your attention move to the quiet, to the still.